Hey everyone, it's Friday again, and this time we're not popping the popcorn and we're not going into the theater. We're gathering around and we're going to have a very heartfelt and sincere discussion in tribute to a man who passed just this week. I'm talking about none other than Ivan Reitman. I know we were scheduled to do Blade Runner, and we will get to Blade Runner uh, probably next week or the week after. But we felt it was important to pay tribute to this man who's brought so much joy to many of us over many decades with his movies. So, with that in mind, before I introduce my fellow Cinema Crusaders, we put together a small retrospective video to look at the man and some of his work over the years. We hope you enjoy it, and here it is. Apologies, it started midstream. Let me start it again. Here we go. All right. So that's Ivan Reitman. He was a director, a writer, a producer, incredibly talented man who brought together so many wonderful artists to give us entertainment over a number of decades, and he will sorely be missed. So, in order to talk about him, his legacy, some of his movies that he either directed or produced, and what they meant to us, I'm going to bring on two of my fellow Cinema Crusaders who are with me here tonight to talk about Mr. Reitman. So first, I'm going to introduce another creator. He writes for Omen Comics and also for the Revelation uh, imprint on Omen Comics. He's also a prose writer, English teacher, wonderful teacher, and a good friend of mine. I'm going to bring on Steve Shabling Sellers.
Yeah, and this is one of those that cases where it's hard to really put into words the impact that this man had. He is certainly somebody who I would say was a formative influence on my movie watching life. I don't know that there are too many people who didn't grow up watching Ghostbusters at this point. Even if they didn't know who he was by name, I think that a lot of the movies he made are things that have stuck with people over the years. And even if they may not know whether he wrote it or directed it or produced it, these are things that have had a long-standing impact on pop culture, on what we understand of good cinema and of comedy. He was one of the better comedy directors that I can think of, certainly. And so I would say, while it's very easy to say, okay, we're here to mourn his passing, I think it's important more so to celebrate his life and his legacy and the great movies that he made.
Absolutely. I will say before I bring on our next crusader that I showed my wife this video, and she was surprised by how many movies were tied to Ivan Reitman that she had seen. So, I mean, I think that pretty much sums up a lot of his legacy. Uh, so next I will introduce another creator. He's not only a writer, he's also an artist. I know that he is doing some work for a comic book company, but I will not share that information because that is his to put out there. He's a very talented man. He's our friend and a fellow podcaster. He's the mouth from the South, that wonderful human being, Jeff Bracey.
Mouth from the South. You had to do that. Yeah, I'll go ahead and make the announcement here since you've given everybody the teaser. I have joined the ASAP comic family, and I'll be working with our one of our other fellow Comic Crusaders, David
Don't gi-
Taylor,
don't give
DT2
don't
Comic Chat.
don't give away the title, but so all of your sloppy crew here is involved in making comics now, and they're going to be out this year for you to pick up, all of you. So make sure you look for
We are
them.
trying to walk the walk, and
Yeah.
as we talk the talk.
Yes,
Exciting times, exciting times.
exactly.
Well, let's see if a bunch of old guys can get it done, right?
Yeah. So enough of that though, because we are here to pay tribute to Ivan. So I am gonna
just want to say, like, my thoughts on Ivan is, you know, it says you'll know a man by his works, and thinking of this man, or sometimes also they say the fruits of one's labor. And if you think of Ivan like a tree, a flowering tree, and his roots spread deep, because I was aware of how much that he had directed, which deeply influenced a lot of my my childhood experiences and even growing up. And you just see this web of roots, how connected he was, the things he directed and he produced. But look at the fruit that his tree has borne. It is almost innumerable classics. And you think of film after film, decade after decade. And that's really all the testament you need to what a legend we have lost.
absolutely. So this is going to be this is going to be a much different than our normal show. We're paying tribute to the man and his work. So we're going to start off we're going to go a little bit of round table here. We'll go around the horn, and each of us has something he worked on, either as a director or a producer, and sometimes as a writer as well, that we want to highlight, and we'll go ahead and comment on that. We're going to go around a couple times and then see where that takes us. So strap in with us. Enjoy this retrospective look back at Ivan Reitman's career. And if you're out there and you have any moments that you particularly like, please comment and share them with us so we can share them with the world, and we can comment on them as well. So I'm going to start with Steve, and for the first movie, if you want to bring up a movie, one that he was involved in, that we can go ahead and share with the audience.
Well, let's get the biggest one out of the way, and that's Ghostbusters. This is a movie that was, a huge impact on my childhood. Like, it's just one of those where, you went to see it and you just were blown away by, how funny it was and how imaginative it was, and how likable the characters all were. Like, even the minor characters, whether it was Rick Moranis' character or, whether it was Janine, they all had, defined characters. We grew to like them so much so that these characters spun off into animation, into video games. It spawned off sequels and reboots. I mean, this is the kind of lightning in the bottle thing that, only once comes around once in a very great while. And it was an original IP. And in the age of reboots, being able to do that was really impressive. I would say watch the movies that made us on Netflix if you really want to get a really great rundown on how Ghostbusters was made, because I didn't even know all the details, and it really highlights what Reitman did to make this movie work. Because really, at first, it was going to be a Dan Aykroyd film with John Belushi and Eddie Murphy, and that fell apart after Belushi died. And then Reitman came in later, looked at the script and said, okay, you have a really great idea here. The idea of catching ghosts. Why don't we make the story about a going into business story with these three guys that get out of academia, which these days I can actually relate to a little bit. And so this movie's grown on me over time, which is, strength of it. But even with that, these guys get out of academia, go into business for themselves, find a niche, and they become successful doing something that they enjoy doing. And I think that that's a film, that we should definitely aspire to. And it's a lot of fun. And not only that, I mean, how much Reitman was able to work with guys like Bill Murray, because Bill Murray ad-libbed it up quite a bit between takes. Some of his best lines in the film, we came, we saw, we kicked its ass, as he comes out having trapped that first ghost in the hotel. I mean, just amazing scene. But the thing with Reitman is that he knew which takes to keep and which things to throw out. he took all these ideas that Harold Ramis had brought, that Dan Aykroyd had brought, things that he had done, and he even took ideas from his own actors when he was stuck. He didn't know what to do with the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper. He just thought that these were cool names. Maybe he thought it was funny because we see the humor with the whole Keymaster Gatekeeper thing. But I think it was Sigourney Weaver that gave that idea shape, because she wanted to come in and say, "Hey, why don't I turn into a dog?" And so when you get the whole, "Yeah, she's a dog," that all came from Sigourney's idea. But all of this comes from Ivan Reitman knowing when to listen to his talent, knowing when they had the right ideas and putting it together. And on top of that, this was a guy who knew how to make money. The reason why he was able to get approval for funding for $25 billion to make it was because he had made a huge profit off of Stripes. And by then he was a proven commodity. They knew he could work under budget and make a huge return. And they made a massive return with Ghostbusters. I mean, just everything came together, and it started. I wouldn't say it started the careers of a bunch of people, but it certainly made a lot of them more noticeable. Even guys like Ernie Hudson, who I think is an underrated talent. This is the role he's best known for. All these kinds of actors, and it was just an amazing, amazing film on so many levels. It's lightning in a bottle, and we're probably never going to get too many movies like that.
Absolutely, and the movie is still loved today. I'm going to kick it over to Jeff if he has any comments or personal story about the movie. Please feel free to share that as well. And Steve, if you have one, please do. The only thing I will say, you mentioned Stripes. Before that, he had done Meatballs, and I'm pretty sure both those movies are going to come up in the future here in a second. But both those movies, he worked with Bill Murray, and Bill Murray came back to work with him both times. And Reitman brought him back, but Bill Murray came back, and we're going to see that as a theme. You'll see it as a theme in the retrospective we did, is that he was an actor's director, an actor's producer. They like to work with him. That story you had about Sigourney Weaver is a great example of why. So before I kick it over to Jeff, is there any personal connection that this movie had for you? Like, is there anything, or you just enjoyed the movie? So, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely one of those movies that, I think it's one that you like to go back to. And it's one of those that holds together over time. And even in some levels, gains more appreciation over them. Just all these characters were great. And I'll be honest, I think Harold Ramis, too bad that Harold Ramis never got a chance to play Reed Richards, because I think he would have been perfect. He was just, but a lot of that was just Reitman, knowing, the people around him, working with them the best he could, taking their best ideas, giving them, room to flourish. And I would say one thing also that shows how good Reitman was is managing conflict, because Bill Murray was not the easiest guy to work with. And he and Ramis had a falling out on Groundhog's Day, which Ramis directed. And I can't help but wonder that if Reitman had directed that, whether they would still have been friends for all those years until they reconciled.
Very interesting. How about you, Jeff? Any comments on Ghostbusters?
Yeah, I was going to say something in a similar vein about that Reitman's ability to manage his talent is pretty extraordinary, because Bill Murray, midway to later in his career especially, has become notorious for just, doing whatever Bill Murray wants to do. Not to say that Bill doesn't have good ideas or whatnot on set, but he's become rather a force of nature, to the point where, like, if you want to get in touch with him, he's got a 1-800 number, and that's how he chooses his projects. And, you hope for the best. So there's a guy who's in a very different headspace than most people in Hollywood. And the fact that he would keep coming back to work with this man again and again says a lot for the type of relationship that they have, because they had a relationship that ended up being almost like a Johnny Depp to a Tim Burton. Like one muse feeding off of the other, that they just generated this similar interest where they would just, this is a great project. I want to do it. I'm on board. Let's make this thing happen, to deal with whatever was going on. And it's just so impressive that he can do that. And like when I get to talk about the movie that I want to get on, I also think that, like Steve said here, that he had an undeniable talent for making you care about characters in a film, and that's part of that is writing. But even if he's not writing a project, he cares enough as a director to give you those moments with even small players that there's something you see, you can identify with, you can empathize with, and that is a skillful hand. So nothing but love for what he does. And not everything he did was great, but a vast majority of it was. So there you go.
I will
Yeah.
add one thing on Murray, if you don't mind. He had a notorious habit of people not knowing whether he would show up on set to work on the day that he was supposed to go up and work. He showed up on the day that Ghostbusters started. No questions asked. He was there on time and he did everything that he was supposed to do. And I wonder how much of that was because he respected Ivan Reitman.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially since he had turned 2 movies, and the first one, Meatballs, it had all of the indicators that this should have been a barely performing film or maybe an underperforming film. And instead, Bill Murray and I would say Reitman turned it into a success, which went to Stripes, which became a success off the back of the Vietnam War, I should add, a movie about the military, and then leading into this. I think that speaks to something else, though, that I really wanted to hit on before I share something personal, and then we go to Jeff, which is that he had an eye for talent and what was going to be and what was and was not popular with the American or the movie-going public. So let's look at this movie in particular with Ghostbusters. He really mined Saturday Night Live. And other people have tried to do it, to do other movies to a greater or lesser degree. But he was very, very good at bringing several people from Saturday Night Live, the obvious ones being Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, forward and putting them in movies and putting them in places to succeed. So they already were faces to a certain degree, but then he played on their personalities, their strengths, and put them in a position to succeed. And he was really, really good at it. And he turned Bill Murray, who and Dan Aykroyd, who can be blue to a certain degree. They can be irreverent and not appropriate for families, and put them in movies that families enjoyed while still be giving a wink and a nudge a lot of times to the adults. And that is a skill which, if you can master, is a license to print money.
Nothing happened in the bedroom. That's a crime.
Yeah, exactly. So I will say then, as one of the people who was, one of the many people have seen Ghostbusters that was a child when it came out, this movie holds a really special place in my heart. I mean, yes, I was a fanboy over Star Wars, but what kid in the 70s wasn't a fan over Star Wars? But as far as a movie that captured me from the minute I saw advertisements for it, this was the one. I had the shirts. I called there was a number you could call the Ghostbusters, and it was a 555 number. But if you called it, it actually had someone pick up. And then it just so happened that summer in Southern California, it was incredibly hot, and my family we had one small window air conditioner for the entire house. So to stay cool and to save money, believe it or not, based on how prices are, we went to the movies all day for almost a week. And I saw Ghostbusters every day, multiple times a day for a week in the movies. And I never got sick of it. And I've always loved the movie since. And I would, if I could speak to him now, I would thank him for that, because Ghostbusters is a part of my childhood, just like so many other things are. But Ghostbusters is a major part of it. So thank you to Mr. Reitman for that. So closing the book on Ghostbusters, let's go to Jeff. And what was your first movie you'd like to talk about, Jeff?
I would like to talk about Meatballs.
Aha, all right.
This film holds a special place in my heart. During the 80s, I was a teenager, and the 80s was surprisingly a great time for a lot of teenager and freshman college sort of movies came out in this period. But I think a lot of that probably owes a great deal to Ivan Reitman's Animal House and Meatballs, and they fall in between those two areas. And there's a lot of imitators since then, some fairly successful, some very successful, I think. And then a lot of things were just kind of like very cheap, passable entertainment. But, Reitman really set the bar. Looking back, I decided to rewatch Meatballs today for this podcast. And I was struck because I haven't watched it in a while. And once again, when we think about Ghostbusters and Animal House, how skillful he is at handling a large ensemble cast. Now, Bill Murray is clearly the lead, so he's the guy we follow. And this film is just full of no-name actors and actresses. Nobody. I went through the credits at the end trying to think, like, have I seen this guy in anything else? Have I seen her in anything else? And I couldn't think of too many things. And looking at the cast of actors, a lot of people with some very ethnic noses, and I feel like they just pulled a bunch of actors from like the New York area and slapped them into this film. And these guys, even though you've probably never seen them before or never will again, and forgive me if you guys have gone on to do bigger and better things, I was impressed by the performance that he got out of everybody who was in the film. And you like everyone, even though, because the cast is so large, you care about the characters. And even though their parts are not as meaty as Bill Murray's, and even Bill Murray's part in the movie, he's not in like every shot in the film. Ivan Reitman really takes care to try and give each character at least something of an arc, no matter how minor they seem to be. You get Spaz, you get his arc. Fink gets his arc. You see how Bill is pursuing Roxanne, and of course you got Rudy in the film, the kid who doesn't really want to go to camp, and you almost get the idea that maybe he's going to camp because his parents are divorced and his dad can't keep him over the summer, something like that. It's kind of baked in there. And you see what a wonderful relationship he builds with between Murray's character and this kid Rudy as this kind of older brother, favorite uncle kind of figure, this guy who helps bring him out of his shell. And so there's a lot of really sweet things going on. And it's not just a matter of wacky hijinks. This movie has a tremendous amount of heart. It's an underdog story. And as somebody who went to camp as a kid, I've seen all these things. I've seen the snobby rich kids. I've seen the obnoxious brats. I've seen like the funny kids, the kids who want to get along, the kid who's always sneaking the snacks. Like, and of course, the guys who are like trying to take a peek into the girl's house and see what's going on over there. I've seen the whole gamut of it. And this film does all of that and does it in a really sweet, heartwarming, and of course, funny way. And I think for me, this is like quintessential Reitman, because when I think of the breadth of his career, one thing I've noticed, whether he's directing, writing, producing, is that he has a fine eye for entertainment and knowing how to produce quality entertainment. He makes films that people enjoy, no matter what the genre is. So that's my say on that. Really great film, and it's a film that I can go back to again and again, year after year.
Real quick before I kick it over to Steve to see if he has any comments on the film, I will say that everybody in this movie, except for Bill Murray, did not have a huge career in Hollywood. None of them. The only person that had any sort of career was the gentleman who played the senior camp counselor. And let me look up his name real quick. But he went on to be part of... Why am I missing it? Well, he went on to be part of Cagney and Lacey.
Oh, yeah.
And that is about it.
The young man who played Rudy, he did have a career for a while as well.
Yeah. I mean, so Harvey Atkin was the gentleman that was in Cagney and Lacey. But I mean, most of them had careers, but they never had careers as A-list talent.
Yeah.
And this movie became that popular with Bill Murray shouldering the load, but Reitman taking it, using Murray, and instead of dominating the whole movie, Murray plays off all of these unknowns and really makes something funny. So before I add, I did have one more thing I wanted to add.
That's a compliment on Murray's part. You can see his generosity as an actor in this film, that he is willing to feed you have a synergy when you're working on a set or you're working on a play. Any of you have ever done any acting out there, and this ebb and flow between the people who are involved in this thing is very important. The dynamic, the charisma, the chemistry, and my hat's off to Bill for being so generous, as he is the face, the one that people know, and he gives all of these guys a lot of time to shine.
And he was a name at this point. He's just come off of Saturday Night Live, you know, and there were a number of people coming out of that that Reitman had worked with, including Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. You know, so real quick over to Steve, and then I got one more point. But Steve, I don't know if you've seen this movie before, but do you have any thoughts on it?
I haven't seen it, so I can't really talk about it. I will talk in general terms about the style of filmmaking, because I'm in agreement with Jeff. This is somebody who really understood how to do cast ensembles. You know, he was very good at not making any one actor or any one character the focus. We see that in many of his other films, including Ghostbusters. You know, he has stories in mind for a lot of these characters. You know, he's very good at bringing them to life. He's very good at letting his actors bring them to life as well. And we definitely see that. And he knows what talent he's working with. But at the same time, even though he works with these same actors over and over, they're never the same characters over and over. Bill Murray in Stripes, for example, is not the same thing, you know, that he plays as Bankman, you know, or any of the other characters that we see him. You know, Reitman really kind of lets them, you know, take these characters in new directions, you know, and make them stand out, while at the same time, like, making everything an ensemble, you know, and keeping in mind that this is Hollywood, where egos tend to prevail and ego conflicts are very, very common. And yet you never really got the sense that there was a whole lot of ego in a Reitman production, or even from Murray, even given like some of his antics, you know. And I think that's a credit to Murray. I think that Murray, you know, he goes for what works for the joke, and he goes for what works for the scene. And I think, you know, that even though he does a lot of ad-libbing, you know, and it's like sometimes he doesn't show up, you know, when he's called on to deliver, he delivers, and he leaves everyone else room to shine as well with him. You know, rising tide, you know, lifting all boats. And I think that that's really like the strength of both Murray and Reitman, because Reitman knows, you know, when to pull the brakes on and when to let them run with it. And when, you know, he knows when they're running with it and they're succeeding, he's succeeding. And there are not many directors that really understand that. And I will also agree that, you know, this is a guy who's about entertaining, making, you know, fun movies and all of this. He's not really like what you would call a modern director. And that is to Reitman's credit. I wish there were more like him.
Just a quick note. You guys hit on a lot of what I would say about Meatballs. The other thing I would say is, once again, this is another movie that's really tied up in my childhood. Just to share a personal story for all of you. My parents saw this movie originally at the movie theater. And, you know, once they thought that it was okay for kids to see, we as a family went to the drive-in. You know, drive-ins were big back then. And this was I think the first or the second movie. I think it might have been the second movie, if I remember correctly. And it was a big deal for me. My brother was asleep because my brother was much younger than I was. But to be able to stay up and watch the second movie was a big deal, because that was usually the adults' movie. You know, the kids watch the first movie, and then you get in your footed pajamas, you know, and you go to sleep in the back, and your parents watch the second movie. If they caught you trying to watch the second movie, you got in trouble. You know, so it's like, you don't watch the second movie. You don't listen to it, even though sound's coming in. You go to sleep back there. And so we got to see this, and then my parents bought the soundtrack for the movie, and that was a big deal.
Good soundtrack.
And we listened to the soundtrack all the time, you know, and it was different. The other soundtrack I really remember as a kid that my parents had was Star Wars, but this one they had as well. And when my dad would put it on, my brother and I would go crazy just dancing through the house. I mean, so it's just one of those joyful moments that comes back to me. And it all starts with this man and what he put together to make this movie. You know?
And while we're talking about music, I don't think that we can neglect the soundtrack for Ghostbusters, which is iconic.
Absolutely.
And that soundtrack, even some of the other tracks on it are really, really good if you listen to those. I did as a kid.
Yeah, and you know, like we said before, Reitman was a director and a writer, but he was often a producer. In fact, he's most often a producer in a lot of this. He was a very hands-on producer. You know, he got involved. He wasn't just sitting there making sure the I's were, you know, dotted and the T's were crossed. He was involved in the process. You know, he let his director direct, but he was there working on everything. So the next movie I'm going to bring up is also one of his early works, and we will get to stuff later in his career, I assure you. But as a former soldier, I have to bring this movie up. It is, you know, if you were in the Army, especially, and you didn't watch this movie, I don't know what's wrong with you. And it's Stripes. Stripes is just, it still is one of the funniest movies that I have ever seen. I can never stop laughing at it. I know I was talking to Steve earlier. He made the same comment. The cast is absolutely unbelievable. We talk about the cast of Ghostbusters and the star power it had. And then, you know, Bill Murray, you know, basically carrying the heavy lifting on Stripes, even though he got a lot of great help, or Stripes, Meatballs, from his lesser known cast members. But here, Reitman brings together Bill Murray, a very unknown John Candy at that point, who is going to go on to be a megastar. Warren Oates as Sergeant Holka, who was in a number of things. Harold Ramis as Russell. You know, Sean Young is in this movie. John Larroquette is in this movie. I mean, those are all
Judge Reinhold.
That's right. Judge Reinhold is in this movie. I mean, all of these guys are headliners, and they come together and play their parts to perfection. And then I will say this movie is coming off the back of the Vietnam War. People had a bad taste in their mouth about the Army. They had a bad taste about being in the Army, recruitment, the draft. The draft was now gone, so it was an all-volunteer Army after Vietnam. And somehow Reitman took this project, which most probably producers and directors would just run away from. They're like, "Are you kidding me? You want me to
this should have bombed."
Yeah, and you want me to make a comedy out of this? It's like, are you serious right now? And credit to the actors who signed on to it too. And I wonder how much that is because Reitman showed them the script and talked to them about it. But I don't know that for sure. But he took this movie and poked fun at the Army. But you know what? Every Army person that's ever watched it, every military person who's ever watched it, loves it because he kept it true to the spirit of what the military is about to a certain extent. And the hijinks that could go on for real in barracks and everything else. And then just gave us a crazy Animal House-like story taking place in a basic training unit and then an Army unit. And it just goes off the rails in the best way possible. And you love this movie. I mean, they're going around in a Winnebago that turns into a damn tank, for God's sake. I mean, come on. It just doesn't get better than that. And then to talk, and I saw this movie as a kid and loved it. I saw it as a young man who was in the Army and loved it. I've seen it as an adult and loved it. Every time I've gotten something different out of it. Like, and I will give you a perfect example about that wink and nod to the kids can enjoy it and laugh. And then the adults understand what's really going on. Bill Murray goes after one of the women one time with a spatula and then an ice cream scoop. And as a kid, I remember laughing about that. That's right, Paul. Army training.
Yes.
That is a fact, Jack. He goes after her with a spatula and then the scoop. And as a kid, I remember watching this, having no idea why he was doing it. It just was funny. Everybody else was laughing. I was laughing. Then I grew up. And I had a whole different understanding of that scene. But it's like you can show that to the kids and they laugh right along with you. And then the adults are all looking at each other and laughing and winking at each other too, you know, and that is just so special. Part of it is to the writers, most definitely, but part of it is to the cast and the producer or director or both for pulling it off in such a way that you can take your kids to see Stripes. I mean, let me backtrack. Back then, you couldn't take your kids to see Stripes because there was nudity in it as well. And John Larroquette plays his part as the peeping Tom officer to perfection. You know, especially when the corporal walks in and he throws the binoculars through the window. So That is outstanding. But yeah, I mean, this movie, I just, you have to giggle. And the last thing I'll say before I kick it over to you guys to put some comments in is that one of the things you're going to find about a lot of Reitman films, there are films that are incredible works of cinema that will touch you in deep emotional places. And then there are films that just enter your heart and your sense of who you are and the zeitgeist. And those films are always quotable films, especially for guys. When guys start quoting movie lines at each other, that is a sign of how much they love the movie. And this movie and a lot of Reitman movies are just incredibly quotable. Going back to Paul, army training, sir. Everybody knows what movie you're talking about, what scene it is.
Razzle dazzle.
Exactly. You
Gee,
know,
son of bitch.
yeah. And everybody knows that they want Ivan Reitman to be their big toe. You know, so you know.
Just watch out. Car is going to shove it up your.
Yeah. So over to Steve. Comments on Stripes.
Oh yeah, to be honest, I had not seen this movie for a long time, and I only really watched it for the first time this week to basically study up for the show. And I will say I am so kicking myself for not having seen this movie sooner. It is one of those movies that even today, decades later, is laugh out loud funny. I do not laugh a whole lot at comedies. I was laughing like all the time, like watching this. I'm like, because these jokes are clever. They're smartly written. They have nuance. You can enjoy them on a number of levels. It's really great. And the thing is, these situations that are brought up, yeah, they're exaggerated. Some of them would never happen in the real army, but they're true enough to the real military that you can see, like, yes, this would absolutely happen. And even though I haven't served like you guys have, I was actually kind of interested to sort of see what your reactions to it, because you've been actually in it. But I've seen enough of military life where I can say, yep, that's true. And to be honest with you, I mean, I spent a lot of time around Fort Bragg, and that base looks like Fort Bragg. The buildings, the barracks that they use were legitimate barracks. And I found out later they filmed it at Fort Knox. And I'm like, yeah, that's why it looks like Fort Bragg, because it's like right next door, more or less.
I have to share a story with you. I've done training at Fort Knox a number of times. I've stayed or been in, I've slept in or been in every single building that is there on their basic training post, every single one. And all of us, the minute we got there, thought, we're on the set of Stripes.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. But again, Reitman's characters are so believable, and they're all different from the other characters that they played. And I will say also that one thing that you can really tell in the sign of a really good comedy is when the actors are visibly trying not to laugh, and it's on camera. There are numerous times where you catch Harold Ramis like trying not to laugh because of some crazy thing that Bill Murray did on the set. And it's absolutely wonderful. And that's always a sign that you're dealing with something special, or something legitimately funny, is when the actors themselves are laughing, and in on the joke. And you can sort of get that experience. And you can also tell it was a fun set to be on. These people love making this movie. And you have to put it down to Reitman creating that, fun, work environment that these people wanted to be on set. They wanted to go and, do these crazy things, with the army. And it's just really, really wonderful. It's just, I love all these characters. You love Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, but, even the John Candy character was interesting. The peeping Tom officer, it's like, yeah, there's always one of those guys. He would be me too today. Wonderful. So, but then there are like sort of things where it's like, if you're familiar with things, that wouldn't happen, but you can forgive it because the things that matter, the culture of the army, the way soldiers act, the way people go into recruitment not knowing anything about it and thinking that they're going to have a great time, and then they find out what they signed up for and they want to leave. All that feels really, really true to, at least in my experience. But I'll kind of let you guys, a little bit more, talk more about that. But it's one of the comedy classics for sure. And you can see why this movie made a ton of money.
You know, it's funny you say all that, and I got to share this. It's a little personal story, and then I'm going to go to Jeff, and then, you know, so we can get to some other movies. But my wife and I met on a blind date, and I was in the military at that point, and we met, and we were alone talking. The other couple we were with were off, and she goes, "So, what makes you think you could pull off a blind date?" And I looked at her, and without batting an eyelash, I go, "Well, chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual." When she laughed and knew what movie that was from, I knew she was a keeper. You know, so you got. I just got to say that. So
well played, sir. Well played.
Over to you, Jeff.
I gotta say, just to answer Steve's question about like how crazy things can get in the military. This isn't anything I did myself, so there's that. But my training was in behavioral science for the military, and we got a lot of interesting stories to see what other 91Gs would deal with when you're out in the field. And bored soldiers with a lot of money will just do weird things because they've got nothing else to do, and there is a lot of betting going on because you're out in the field and you can't spend your money on anything. So one guy got sent to my LT for evaluation because his CO caught him stirring the coffee pot with his junk because he was infantry, and like that's what he had to explain. Sir, he's infantry. Like this guy must be crazy. Like, no, he's a bored soldier with a lot of money, and his buddies dared him to do it. That's what happens. So yeah, really weirdly goofy stuff that you wouldn't think would ever happen happens. And I didn't join the military myself till about a decade after watching this film. So I just enjoyed it as a comedy. But after that, watching it, I was like, oh man, these guys know the deal. And the brilliance of this sort of thing is when I look at Stripes, when I look at Animal House, when I look at Ghostbusters, Meatballs, all these movies, is Ivan apparently really likes the underdog. And he wants to champion the underdog. And you start off thinking, there is no way these guys are going to get through boot. There's no way the kids from Camp North Star are ever going to beat the Mohawks, the Ghostbusters. These guys don't know a doggone thing about business. They're all academics. And it just goes from movie Animal House. They're on double secret probation. Come on. They're a bunch of drunken losers. But I love that this movie, the first half of this movie is all about their training and how involved it is. And look, when I was there day one, I saw some guys like that who got the culture shocks. Like, we didn't know what we were signing up for. I had several people in the military family. They told me what the deal was going to be. So I had my head on straight about it. But you see the shock and the fear in their eyes, and they're like, oh no, and we can't get out of this. No, you can't. You're here. So watching this, and he's so good at developing these characters so that you love them. You want to see them succeed. You get behind them. Even though Bill Murray's character is a jerk initially in this film, and Harold Ramis has to chase him down and drag him back to the base, you're still on their side. You know, you never get to a point where you just don't hate them. I mean, where you just don't like them at all. And so he builds up this sort of continuity of believability, even when the context can be a bit absurd. So by the time you get to the super weapon tank Winnebago, you're there. You're there. You are so invested in this. It doesn't matter how abstract he gets. Like where you got professors fighting ghosts, or a camp that's been beaten 12 years in a row by this other camp who's full of like these pro athletes can win. The ridiculous Animal House ending. You feel like somehow they're still going to be on the campus. So I love this so much about him. And just seeing him fill these expectations, it was kind of like I can't help but remember when Steven Spielberg was Peter Benchley was asking Steven Spielberg about the ending of Jaws. For those of you who haven't read the book, Jaws in the book, the shark just dies. By the end of the book, it has taken so much damage from its encounter with the three men who were out to deal with it that eventually it just dies before it can eat the sheriff at the end of the book. Now, in the movie, of course, you see Spielberg is going to blow it up in the most ridiculous way possible. Such a thing would never happen. And Benchley addressed this, and Spielberg's comment was, the story that I've taken these people on, it doesn't matter. they will go along with me at this point. And Reitman does that with all of his films. He leads you down this path. You become one of these kind of bumbling beloved characters, and you're right in their midst. They have that everyman sort of perspective to them, even when you've got guys who are supposed to be academics like Harold Ramis, Murray, and all that, and you can bring in the more everyman guy like Hudson, but these are still, even though they're academics, you still have Venkman in there as like the kind of the average Joe of the bunch. And so it's just so brilliantly skillful the way he does this. So yeah, by the time you get to the Winnebago super weapon and you just know everything's going to work out and these guys are just going to make it, and you're there for the ride and you exult in their triumph, because we do want to see the underdog triumph. And, Ivan understood this, and he knew how to bring us along that ride and do it in a way that by the end, no matter how abstract or absurd it gets, we are there for the entire journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, we started this movie not somber, but we were serious. And just talking about his films, I don't know about you guys, but I feel light and happy already. It's just, and this is just remembering the movies. So let's go for another round. I mean,
his films make us smile.
Yeah. We've gone a little bit longer, but you know what? I want to make sure that we do him justice, and so we'll go for another round here. So I'm going to go opposite way around. Let's go right back to Jeff. Another movie of Ivan Reitman's that you wanted to talk about.
All right, I'm going to kind of condense this into two movies because I want to talk about Ivan as a producer, because that was a major focus of his career as well. And just to show how entertaining this guy is and how he understood entertainment and wanting to bring entertainment to the masses, I think these are important to mention. Our buddy Lance, who couldn't be with us today, wanted to go over Heavy Metal. So I want to address that film because for a guy who mostly for a lot of like underdog kind of screwball comedies, this was a real step out of his box to take stories and art from the comic Metal Hurlant, and which became Heavy Metal over here. Some really extreme content because these are adult fantasy stories. And again, Ivan pulled from people that he'd worked with and knew well. John Candy is a major voice actor throughout the Heavy Metal movie. He plays several characters in several of the anthology pieces of it. But for him to have the vision to look at a movie like this, an animated film, and animated films outside of Disney were not often terribly successful in America. There were some guys who worked very hard to break in, like Ralph Bakshi and others, but it was an uphill battle if you were wanting to do something animated, and this was a groundbreaking movie. And for him to have the vision to do that, and it bespeaks once again to him producing Stripes at a time when that should have been the last movie any studio wanted to touch, given the climate of how people thought about the military and conflict and things like that. So I really have to hand it to him to take a gigantic chance and still be able to produce just something that is a classic piece of filmmaking, a cult classic. It broadened the expanses of a lot of people into comics outside the American market. Yeah, I know I got very interested in heavy metal after watching this film, and the choice. I don't know how involved he was with the soundtrack, but if you don't own the soundtrack, you should own the soundtrack. It is like just a montage of awesome from the time period. The other film I want to briefly discuss is Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. This is pure B-movie schlock, but it is glorious B-movie schlock, also from the 80s, during the 3D craze of the 80s. And yet, this movie, which should be a nothing burger, but I remember so fondly as a teenager going to my teeny tiny little local theater, because it just had this amazing cast of Peter Strauss, Molly Ringwald, Ernie Hudson again, and Michael Ironside, who was like just the quintessential villain ever since Scanners. And they managed to put together this small budget film, but you can just feel the love in this. It should be a movie that is so forgettable, but here it is, 35, almost maybe 40 years later, and I still remember this movie fondly. I still look at the set designs, the characters, the costuming. This guy's sex robot dies, and he's oh, that I'm sorry, that might have been Cherry 2000 I'm thinking of there, but he's trying to save these women from this this warlord, and he picks up Molly Ringwald, who's this scruffy little teenager along the way, but she's kind of spunky, so she kind of proves herself, and Michael Ironside is playing such a great villain, and he's just completely ruthless, but it's got some really fun effects in it despite the low budget, and it just all gels and it works. And despite the fact that this is never going to be on anybody's top 10 list, for me it is a delightful movie that I still can't get out of my head all these years, because Ivan Reitman has an eye not just for talent but for things that are fun. Yeah. And man, I wish we had more people who are just making fun movies these days.
I think that is a wonderful statement. He really did know how to make you enjoy what you were going to see. Steve, anything about those two movies that you'd like to add?
No, not really. I haven't really seen any of those. I do kind of want to see them now.
I would be shocked if you'd seen Space Hunter.
yeah. I mean, those, but yeah, I mean, Heavy Metal is one of those that's like, it's kind of interesting. I did kind of dig into, some of those kind of fantasy comics, mainly like Epic Illustrated, but Heavy Metal was not one that I really dug into. But the way that he kind of described it makes me kind of curious about it. So yeah, I'm kind of interested. I will agree that he's definitely a creator that like to expand his repertoire into different genres. I'll kind of talk into that when I get to my pick, though.
Cool. The only thing I will say is I haven't seen the one, but I have seen Heavy Metal. I didn't see it in theaters, but we all got together, my grandma and grandpa's house with everybody, and it was on HBO, and I sat down and watched it. And I was already into comic books, and here was something else. And I would say, looking back on it, I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back on it, Disney was out of the cartoon game for the most part. They would come out with Black Carlton around the same time, but it didn't do really well. And people were tired of the traditional Disney cartoons, and it would stay that way until The Little Mermaid, I believe, which would be the early 90s. So this succeeded in a market that had dried up, and was popular. It was kind of an underground popular, and it had the dangerous music and everything else like that. So as a kid who was into comic book fare, it was still cool to see that. The other thing I'll say is, we talk about cast all the time. We don't know for sure, and I'd love to interview these people and find out, what actually was going on. But you have the same cast members showing up in a number of Ivan Reitman's projects, which must mean something, and I've heard from a few of them on other things that it was. But here we had John Candy was in this movie. Harvey Atkin, who played that counselor from Meatballs, was in this movie. Mm-hmm. Then on top of that, we had Eugene Levy was in this movie. Mm-hmm. So it's like, these are people working. He worked with so many different people, very talented people. And sometimes these were some of the first things they had done. And he brought them success. He brought them into our hearts, and kudos to him, and you definitely have to give credit to the cast itself and the director as well, but just an incredible, great job. Steve, on to you. What is your next movie we got here?
Okay, I think we'll talk something about one of the films he did towards the end of his career. And that's My Super Ex-Girlfriend. All right. If you have never heard of this movie, and it wouldn't be surprising if you hadn't, I would just go and check it out, because I don't think it was a movie that was appreciated at its time, but I think it's probably one of those movies that would be more appreciated now, particularly if you're a fan of something like Peacemaker, which has fun with superhero tropes. The idea of playing with the DC archetypes and actually making them fun and having comedy and playing them straight with the charm that they had. I think that Reitman did that, which is weird, because I think this is the only superhero movie he ever did, if I remember right. So it's really kind of interesting. But at the same time, he does the same thing that he does with all of his films. He tries to give these characters heart. He tries to make them all believable. I just love the idea that he plays with this perfect fantasy woman, played by Uma Thurman. who is basically like a Superwoman character. She's got all Superman type powers, and and she looks like somebody that everybody would want to have. But then you find out she's emotionally damaged. She wasn't always like this, and when she was young, she was picked on, had a really low self-esteem, and those issues kind of crept under the surface even after she became a superhero. And so when she gets involved with a guy, played by Luke Wilson, and keep in mind, this is the same Luke Wilson who plays Pat Dugan on Stargirl. So if you're a fan of Stargirl and you want to see, Luke Wilson do more superhero stuff, this is the movie for you. And he plays this average guy who is stuck with this obsessive girlfriend who can also break into his house, just by snapping her finger like that. And not only that, but she can kill him by doing the exact same thing. So the idea that here you have somebody who is kind of out of his league in one sense, and in the other is one of the biggest red flag type of people you could ever get involved with. And I just love how that idea gets turned on its head so well. And then you turn out also that her arch enemy is only her arch enemy because he was her high school boyfriend, and it's just these little things. So the whole idea that the superhero and the villain kind of have that undercurrent of sexual tension. In some cases, how this is always made fun of, they actually play that straight in this movie, and so a lot of it is
brilliantly
just
by Eddie Izzard.
Yeah, played by Eddie Izzard. Yeah, and it just comes together so well. It's not one of those. It's one of those movies that I may possibly one day do a retro review on, because I think it's one of those movies that kind of deserves to be brought at some attention to. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I think that if you just want to have a fun superhero story, one that kind of plays outside of the Marvel and DC universes, but has the charm of a DC comic, I think that this is a good film.
Absolutely. I will say, and I'm just going to add my 2 cents in here, and I'm going to go to Jeff, is that I think this movie was a little ahead of its time. We weren't yet to Batman. Batman 89 allowed the public to like superhero movies again. Up until this point, they were either cult classics or ignored. You either had Flash Gordon or Supergirl. We had gotten.
Yeah. We were starting to get Spider-Man, but that's about it.
Yeah, Superman.
The film came out in 2006, so it was past Batman, but Batman had been a while.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the movie. I won't get to talk another movie, but I I still think that this is.
We weren't to Iron Man yet.
No,
right?
No,
we're just pre-MCU.
And I will say though, I think I could definitely say this is that people were kind of tired of comedy and superhero movies going together after Batman. God, pick your pick.
We'd had Meteor Man and Blank Man previous to this.
Yeah, so they really were tired of that. But this, it was done well, and it was enjoyable, and it was funny, and it was relatable, because the superhero thing was in the background, and really it was about this woman and this man and their relationship and how that was all going. And then it was just like it was almost like somebody in the writer room once said, what if you're going through a bad breakup and your ex was a superhero? So it's like just absolutely crazy. What about you, Jeff? Any thoughts on this film?
Yeah, actually quite a few. And I opted not to take my turn on this film because I wanted to talk about the breadth of his vision. And here's another example, like Reitman's most known for when he's directing stuff himself, handling comedies. But here he's still taking a remarkable chance. If you think about it, an obsessive stalker girlfriend, because let's go back to Glenn Close and her great turn as that character. But now you've got that character in this person who is a hero, but she's got all these hangups that allow her to become obsessive and dangerous, and she's got the flipping powers of Superman. This could have gone terribly, terribly awry in the hands of somebody else. I mean, because this is a nightmare scenario when you think about it. Because she does things like horrible, horrible things. Like she drops his car, from a tremendous height. She throws a great white shark in his flipping bedroom while he's got a girl over, after they've broken up. So anybody else handling this could have gone wrong. But I liken this film very much to Jim Carrey's The Cable Guy, which took the idea of a stalker, and it had elements that were truly frightening when you think about it, and potentially even horrific, and still manage to make you laugh about it. And Reitman does that here, but he does it even more playfully. He doesn't get quite as scary as Cable Guy, because Cable Guy is a little bit closer to home. But with the premise of this being a superpowered individual, you can once again get absurd, and that sort of makes it okay to laugh at a situation that in real life we would find horribly, horribly creepy. And by the end, because he's very good at creating these underdog characters, even though Uma Thurman is acting way, out of, out of sorts. She should not be doing anything like this at all. But doggone it, he gets us to like it. Luke Wilson's easy like, because Luke Wilson is almost always that guy. He is such a likable guy on screen, and he's very good at playing that role. Uma Thurman we like because we do get to see her background. We understand what's going on with her, and she is legitimately a hero. She's running around saving the world. But it's like, man, does that mean the price of that is one guy has to suffer when he's her boyfriend? And even like when we get to Eddie Izzard, he's the dastardly villain, and he's such a fun, charming guy to watch on screen, no matter what role he's playing. And watch his comedy if you've never seen his comedy. His stand-up is absolutely brilliant. But even this guy, even though he's the villain of the piece, by the end of the film, you're rooting on him too. So Ivan is just a genius at that, at taking characters that we probably shouldn't like and making them likable and making us root for them. And by the end, he gives us that feel-good sort of thing, because he's really good at that. Everything works out in Ivan's world, and we feel great for it.
Absolutely. Now, we are running a little low on time, but I'm going to hit my movie, and then we're going to go a quick round the horn. And I've got something special I got for the guys here in a second. But I'm going to take hosting privilege here and mention 4 movies, but I only want to go in depth in one. So keep that in mind, guys. But there are some movies. Yeah, there are some movies that I have to mention. I mean, there's a lot that I would love to mention, but I probably run way over time. But first, I have to mention his bravery and his groundbreaking, trail-breaking style. And that movie, I think, is best exemplified in National Lampoon's Animal House. That movie birthed a genre. You had never seen anything like this before. This was at a time when, the exterior of Animal House was basically how you treated academia. Even though it was we were coming off the 60s and everything, academia was pipe-smoking people in their ivory towers, thinking deep thoughts, And here it was with the Deltas and Bluto and everything else going on. So it was just absolutely crazy. And the cast is unbelievable. The Donald Sutherland, the pot-smoking professor, and just the whole thing, and a number of those people would go on to incredible careers, including, unfortunately, the late John Belushi, who was just absolutely fantastic in that movie. The next movie I have to bring up for bravery, and now granted, this was coming towards the end of his career. He'd had a lot of successes, so he could afford to do this. But still, no one wanted to touch this IP, this book, or this band. And he took it and decided, not only am I going to make a biography out of it, I'm going to make a funny biography out of it, which is Private Parts, the Howard Stern story. Now, I think that most of the people who saw this movie were probably already Howard Stern fans, but, it is a legitimately funny movie. It is really, really funny. And the fact that it's actually based on this man's early career and his early life is just incredible, and to take a leap on that, because nobody wanted to touch this guy at all, because he was poison. And Ivan Reitman said, I'll take it, I'll produce it, I'll turn it into a movie, and it'll be successful. And you know what? I don't know how many people saw the movie, but it did make money. So kudos to him for that one. The third movie is, we haven't talked about political commentary, and he wasn't big into political commentary a lot, as far as like in your face, but he did throw it into his comedy sometimes. And one time that I can remember, it was the whole focus of his whole movie, and it was a beautiful movie. I mean, it's an absolutely heartwarming, touching movie that also has some really cool messages. I wish there were more politicians like the lead character in Dave, which he did, who takes over as the president. and it stars Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver. And then it has Frank Langella as the chief of staff, who is the duplicitous, scheming, real, man behind the curtain type. And it's a wonderful movie. I wish they would show this and The Distinguished Gentleman from Eddie Murphy. I think all politicians going to Congress should have to watch those two movies and take a written test before they're allowed to enter. But that's just my little opinion there. So with that said, I am going to get to the movie I want to talk about. Not that this movie is more important than those, but I just felt I couldn't go without mentioning those three, especially Animal House. This last one, for all of you that know, I love the paranormal. I loved and love the X-Files. I love Orlando Brown. I love David Duchovny. And I love Evolution.
Orlando Jones.
Orlando Jones, which came out in 2001. David Duchovny was coming off of X-Files. It had just wrapped up. He was going to try and start a career in movies, which fizzled out, but he eventually found a career on another TV show. But here comes Ivan Reitman, and he produces this movie that's part X-Files, part Alien, maybe, or Aliens. It's a comedy. It's got Sean William Scott in it. It's got not Gillian Anderson, Juliette Moore playing a quirky scientist. It's got all of these things coming for it, and I just think it's a really fun, interesting, and enjoyable movie. Especially as an X-Files fan, I enjoyed it for David Duchovny in it and the material. I enjoyed it for the writing. It had that typical Reitman back and forth quipping and joking between the characters. It has some good musical moments. At one point they defeat a alien in the mall, and the three main characters are driving down the road in a Jeep and play that funky music. White Boy comes on, and all of them are rocking out. And Orlando Jones is sitting there, and he's the one driving, and he's smacking that steering wheel like he's smacking that booty, while they're driving. It's just a fun moment, and it's absolutely brilliant, and it captures the feel of the movie. And I will say this without spoiling for everybody: they defeat the aliens with Head and Shoulders, the shampoo, So it's just incredibly funny, and there's some cameos in it with other people that worked with it before. Dan Aykroyd makes a cameo in this movie, So I really love this movie. I don't want to talk about it for a long time because we've gone through everything, but I had to mention that, and I'm going to kick it around to you guys. I don't know if you've seen Evolution, but if you have, any thoughts on that film? And I'll start with Steve and go to Jeff, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Well, mine will be really quick because I haven't seen it.
Okay.
I will say though that I really find it interesting that David Duchovny comes off of X-Files and then comes onto a film that basically makes fun of everything he spent doing for 9 years. I think that's amazing. But I think Reitman took advantage of that. Like, he knew it's like, okay, what can we do with this actor? Or at least I have this idea for this kind of spoof, involving the paranormal and whatnot. Let's get the guy who probably almost as much as the It's Aliens guy is known for the supernatural and the paranormal, which is David Duchovny. So you bring this guy in, you set him against another redhead, which I find really interesting, and then you're at a point where you just kind of have fun with that. You kind of have fun and see where you can take it in ways that X-Files couldn't take it, and it sounds like Reitman managed to succeed in that.
Oh, absolutely. And the redhead thing was almost certainly on purpose.
That was definitely on purpose.
Yeah. To the point where I will say that Julianne Moore, who likes to play her sex appeal up much more than Gillian Anderson, who is probably the more sexual person in real life, at one point, falls over and she's got a garter on. It's just one of those little snippets. Everybody's like, whoa, and there are so many jokes in here. There's a big-headed alien, and Orlando Jones looks at Duchovny, and it looks like a butt. And he looks at Duchovny, raises his eyebrows, he's like, "Reminds you of anybody?" Or, like that, So just incredibly wonderful, funny things. Jeff, Evolution.
Yeah, Evolution, as I like to sometimes call it, Alien Ghostbusters, because that was legitimate criticism that was leveled at the film. But it's still a very fun film. Once again, Reitman put together a cast that had chemistry. The writing was sharp and witty. There's a lot of jokes in there that work. Some very quotable moments, like "There is always time for lube." That Orlando Jones is a pure joy to watch in the film, and Scott Williams is or is it Sean Williams?
Sean William Scott.
Yeah, I always get dyslexic with his name for some reason. He's one of these guys I think is very funny, and I wish he had had a more sustainable career because I think he's definitely worth watching. Duchovny, of course, Julianne Moore. For Duchovny's part, and this has got to be a strength of Reitman, he wanted nothing to do with this film. His reaction was like, what, a film with aliens? Are you kidding me? What are you trying to do to me? Like, he is all over his agent about that. But imagine what it must have taken to get him on board with this. Like, yeah, we're going to spoof everything you've done. Yeah. And somehow this guy who was ready to move on, distance himself from all that, he got on board, and Duchovny himself has his own charm, his own dry wit, and Reitman handles all of that beautifully amongst the rest of the cast. Makes it a very enjoyable film. And I will also say this about Private Parts. Now, I've never been the biggest Howard Stern fan. I got into him very briefly, shortly before, I guess, the movie came out. For like maybe a year or so, 2 years, I listened to him. And I sort of got into it. I like the round robin style of humor and discussion they had for a bit. I read the book that the movie was based on, found that very funny because it's some of my anecdotes of things. But actually seeing this put down as a documentary of his life was very interesting. So knowing this was somebody's real story, and Ivan still manages to bring the humanity, the heart, and the humor to it. And best of all, it's an incredible film, because I'm not a Stern fan at all anymore, but I still like watching this movie. And it introduced me to the absolutely astounding and wonderful Paul Giamatti. And so I'll always be grateful for that. Like, wow, what a find that guy was. And so you don't have to be a Howard Stern fan to enjoy this film. I'm just saying that it's a really good film, really funny, really heartwarming, really touching in a lot of ways. And as always, when it comes to Reitman, entertaining.
And on top of all of that, we talked about soundtracks. Private Parts soundtrack is also good. And
I have the soundtrack to this film too, yeah.
Thunder Kiss 65 by Rob Zombie. So,
Yeah.
What else can you say? All right. So we're running out of time, but I want to do this. We are the Cinema Crusaders. We're here to review movies, both old and new, but also review old movies when we do, with the thought of trying to get you interested in these movies that may have been lost. With that in mind, I'm going to go around, all of us. I'm going to start with Steve, to go to Jeff, and then I'll finish up. I want to finish up this tribute to Ivan Reitman, because that's really what it's become. It's a tribute to his career. With this, I'd like you to just recommend one movie to anybody out there who watches this, and then give us one movie quote that you remember from an Ivan Reitman film, and tell what film it is. Doesn't have to be the same one, but it can be from movies we already talked about it. Does that sound cool?
Yeah.
All right. So I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So if you need a moment, let me know and I'll go. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Steve first. What do you think?
Yeah, if you want to go.
All right. I will say the one movie I would recommend to everyone out there, and I just talked about it. If you haven't seen Evolution, go watch Evolution. All these other movies I definitely recommend as well, but that one was less known and is a lot of fun. I think you'll enjoy it. The only thing that's a little dated is probably the special effects, but you'll get a good time out of it. It's a really, really fun movie, and it's kind of an intro into that side of Ivan Reitman's career. As far as my quote, I will say, yes, this is true. This man has no dick, from Ghostbusters. If you don't know where the line is from, watch the movie, but that is an actual line uttered by Bill Murray's Venkman character, and it's the movie that takes down the house anytime, every time that Ghostbuster plays. So, who'd like to go next, Jeff or Steve?
I'll go.
All right.
In addition to the movies that we've already discussed, and especially I've already gone into My Super Ex-Girlfriend, so definitely watch that one. In terms of other ones that we've kind of discussed but not gone into, I would say Dave of those. I think it was a really good shall we say, discussion of the George H.W. Bush era. And there's some kind of really funny moments, with this guy, like in the role of the president, having to pretend to be the president, and not to expose himself because otherwise the country goes to hell. And I just love that whole idea. I thought that Sigourney Weaver as First Lady was perfect casting. That was just wonderful. Langella is just wonderfully smarmy. And then you get some really nice physical humor. Like that one scene, I think probably the one I think most people remember is when he's in Detroit and he's like hooked up to these mechanical arms and he's doing this gesture with his arms. It's just absolutely hilarious.
Even
this big.
They even sing
Louis, this big, yeah.
They sing Louis Louis while he's doing the arms.
Yeah.
The arms.
Yeah.
What about your
quote? Yeah, I just had it a minute ago. Oh yeah. Next time someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
Ghostbusters once again, ladies and gentlemen.
It is evidently quotable. One of the most quotable movies of all time.
Quotable and iconic that movie is. Jeff, your favorite.
I'm going to go with another guy who became a favorite to work with Reitman for a while, and I'm going to delve into some Schwarzenegger because they did at least 3 movies I know of together. I would recommend seeing Twins. Once again, this is a great film about an underdog character in Danny DeVito's character. The idea that they are genetic twins, but one is like the apogee of everything you would want in a human being, and Danny DeVito is like the leftovers, the worst qualities of a human being, and the genius of putting these two as the physical opposites as well as having the characteristic opposites is just brilliant. Just an amazing concept to start with, but you really enjoy watching these two grow together and learn from each other. And they do a lot of really fun things in there that show that they really are related. They really are brothers, despite their obvious gross differences physically and morally. But they come together, and he makes a story with a lot of heart. And you find the scientist's mother who was the head of this project, and they form this family by the end, and it's really delightful. Arnold is one of these guys who was able to successfully transition from acting and from action into comedy. Mm-hmm. Something that we do see from some fellows like Dwayne Johnson has been fairly good at that, and Batista's taken a good stab at it with his buddy cab driver movie not too long ago. So it's nice to see that sort of thing happen. And as for quotes, I'm going to go with Arnold again. It's not a headache. It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. It's just a headache. From the beloved Kindergarten Cop.
Yes.
Arnold versus a bunch of 6 and 8 years old is almost too much for him.
I cannot count how many times my wife has come home from school being a teacher and go, "Do you have a tumor?"
Yeah, I actually was doing a Wordle, and it's like I tried tumor and it didn't work, and I was just like the perfect time for that line.
Outstanding. All right. I hope you all enjoyed this look back at Ivan Reitman and his career and the movies he's been involved with. This started, like I said, it started somber, and we're smiling at the end, and it's not disrespectful to him. It's a tribute to him, because thinking about what he was involved with makes us happy. Pay tribute to him in the next week or two. Pick up an Ivan Reitman movie. It could be one of the ones we recommended, one of the ones we talked about, or any other one, and check it out. It'll make you smile, and it will do you some good in this world. So on behalf of myself and my fellow Cinema Crusaders, I want to say thank you for watching this, and thank you so much for being with us. Tune in next week, and we'll have another movie for you. And until then, I will say goodbye and let my host say goodbye, and then we're out of here. See you later, everybody.
What better legacy could he have had than to give us all so much joy?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say if anything is to be taken away from his life, it's that he made other people happy. And that has got to be like one of the best things to leave behind is laughter.
Yeah. So on that note, everyone, you have a good night, and we'll see you next week on Cinema Crusaders. Bye now.